The morning sun peeked through the windows of Metropolitan General Hospital as Jenny Park straightened her white coat and grabbed her third cup of coffee. As the new emergency department manager, she had a lot to prove. Her promotion last month had raised some eyebrows. At 32, she was younger than most of her predecessors. But she'd earned it through 6 years of dedication, innovative solutions, and a reputation for running a tight ship. This Monday started like any other. The night shift was wrapping up, looking exhausted but satisfied after handling 3 car accident victims and a busy weekend of flu cases. Jenny noticed Nurse Thompson had dark circles under his eyes, but still managed to crack jokes with the incoming day staff. "Good morning, everyone," Jenny called out during the morning huddle, her voice carrying across the break room where 20 pairs of tired eyes looked her way. Before we dive into today's challenges, I want to thank the night team for handling that pileup on Highway 16. Dr. Rodriguez tells me all patients are stable. She clicked through her presentation slides, addressing the issues that needed immediate attention. We're still dealing with overcrowding in the waiting area. I know it's frustrating, but remember, every patient deserves our best, even when we're stretched thin. Her colleagues nodded in agreement, some scribbling notes. The really tricky part came next. And heads up, the hospital board inspection is coming soon. No exact date yet, but we need to be ready. A collective groan filled the room, making Jenny smile. I know. Nobody likes inspections. But this is our chance to show them what we've got. Just then, her phone buzzed. The ER was receiving 3 more patients from a construction site accident. Jenny quickly wrapped up the meeting, watching her team spring into action with the precision of a well-oiled machine. This was what she loved about her job: the seamless coordination, the shared purpose, the way everyone knew exactly what to do in a crisis. As she walked through the department, checking supplies and readiness, Jenny noticed the small things that made her proud. The freshly sanitized equipment, the updated patient charts, the calm efficiency of her staff. She'd worked hard to create an environment where professionalism meant both competence and compassion. The construction workers started arriving, and Jenny grabbed a trauma gown. Despite being manager, she never hesitated to jump in when needed. As she helped transfer a worker with a crushed leg onto a bed, she reminded herself why she loved this controlled chaos. Every day was different, every moment mattered, and her team's work made a real difference in people's lives. Between coordinating care for the new arrivals and handling administrative calls, Jenny barely noticed the mornings slipping away. She'd just finished updating families in the waiting room when her assistant handed her a stack of reports that needed review before lunch. Looking at the pile, Jenny sighed and reached for her now-cold coffee. The board inspection would be looking at every detail, and she was determined to have everything perfect. Little did she know, this ordinary Monday was about to become anything but routine. As she settled into her office to tackle the paperwork, she had no idea that in just a few hours, she'd face the most challenging situation of her career, one that would test her principles, her leadership, and her courage in ways she never expected. But for now, she focused on the task at hand, double-checking inventory reports and staffing schedules, completely unaware of the storm that was about to walk through her emergency room doors wearing a bright red hat. The emergency room was buzzing with its usual afternoon energy when Jenny noticed something odd. Through the glass doors, she spotted a tall man in jeans and a black t-shirt, wearing a bright red MAGA hat. He was walking slowly through the department, his eyes focused on a tablet in his hands. At first, she thought he might be a lost visitor, but the way he studied everything, the equipment, the patient flow, even the notice boards, suggested otherwise. Some of the patients in the waiting area were starting to stare. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman waiting for her prescription, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. 2 nurses at the station exchanged glances, and Jenny could feel the subtle change in the atmosphere. The man's presence was creating ripples in the carefully maintained professional environment she'd worked so hard to build. "He's been here for 15 minutes, whispered Nurse Thompson, appearing at Jenny's side. He's taking photos of our equipment and making notes. A few patients have already asked if he's allowed to do that. Jenny nodded, watching as the stranger paused near the trauma bay, typing something into his tablet. The man's casual attitude struck her as unusual. Most visitors showed some sign of anxiety or urgency in an emergency room, but he moved with the confidence of someone who felt completely at home. His expensive-looking sneakers and the latest model tablet suggested he wasn't your average troublemaker, but something still felt off. Jenny straightened her white coat and took a deep breath. As manager, it was her job to handle unusual situations. She dealt with angry patients, confused elderly visitors, and even the occasional celebrity wanting special treatment. This would be no different. "Excuse me, sir," she said, approaching him with a professional smile. The man looked up, and for a split second, something about his face seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. He had that Silicon Valley look, like someone who spent more time with computers than people. "Can I help you?" she continued when he didn't respond. "I noticed you're taking photos and notes. For security reasons, we need to know who's documenting our facility." She kept her tone friendly but firm, the same way she handled all potentially difficult situations. The man smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just doing some research," he said vaguely, his attention already back on his tablet. His response surprised Jenny. Most people at least try to explain themselves when questioned by hospital staff. "Sir, I need to point out our policy about political attire in patient care areas," Jenny said, gesturing to his hat. "We try to maintain a neutral environment for our patients' comfort." She'd had this conversation before with both visitors and staff. It was standard protocol. He looked up again, this time with a hint of amusement. "Really? That's interesting. And what exactly defines political attire?" His question had an edge to it, like he was testing her rather than asking for information. Jenny felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. Something about this conversation wasn't following the usual script. Behind her, she could sense her staff watching, waiting to see how she'd handle this. The entire emergency department seemed to be holding its breath. What happened next would become the talk of the hospital for months to come. But in that moment, standing in her busy ER with a stranger who seemed both out of place and oddly confident, Jenny had no idea she was about to make a decision that would change her career forever. She just knew that she had a job to do and principles to uphold, no matter who this man turned out to be. The tension in the emergency room grew as Jenny stood her ground. She'd handled difficult situations before, but something about this man's confident smirk made her uncomfortable. He kept tapping on his tablet, almost dismissively, as if she was just a minor interruption in his day. "Sir," Jenny tried again, keeping her voice steady, "I understand you might disagree with our policy, but it exists to make all our patients comfortable. We have people here from every background imaginable, and they're already stressed about being in the hospital. Our job is to help them feel safe and cared for." The man finally lowered his tablet completely. "That's an interesting perspective," he said, his tone carrying a hint of challenge. "But don't you think it's more important to respect individual rights? After all, this is just a hat." He gestured to the bright red MAGA cap on his head. Jenny noticed more people watching now. Dr. Lee had paused while checking charts, and the receptionist was pretending to type while clearly listening in. The pressure of being the center of attention made Jenny's collar feel tight, but she reminded herself of the countless times she'd stayed firm on hospital policies. Individual rights are important, Jenny agreed, trying to find common ground. But in a hospital setting, our first priority has to be patient care. Just like we ask people to wear masks during flu season or keep their voices down during quiet hours. It's about creating the right environment for healing. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He was tall enough that Jenny had to look up to meet his gaze, but she didn't back down. "And who exactly," he asked, "decides what creates the right environment?" There was something oddly familiar about his voice, but Jenny pushed that thought aside. Our policies are developed by the hospital board with input from medical staff, patients, and community members, she explained, though she had a feeling he wasn't really interested in the answer. They're reviewed regularly to ensure they serve our community's needs. Just then, a code blue alarm blared from down the hall. Jenny's heart jumped. Someone needed immediate help. But she couldn't leave this situation unresolved. She gestured to Dr. Lee, who immediately rushed toward the code, while Jenny stayed focused on the problem at hand. "Sir, I need to handle an emergency, but I'll be clear. You have 3 options. You can remove the hat and continue your research, step outside with it on, or I'll need to ask security to escort you out." Jenny's voice carried the authority she earned through years of handling crisis situations. The man's expression changed then, becoming almost amused. "You really kick me out? Just like that?" He glanced around the ER, taking in the staff and patients watching them. "Don't you want to know who I am first?" That flutter of recognition hit Jenny again, stronger this time, but she pushed it away. In an emergency room, everyone got the same treatment. That was one of her core beliefs. "Actually, sir, it doesn't matter who you are. Our policies apply to everyone equally." He started typing something on his tablet again, shaking his head slightly. "That's quite a stance you're taking. Bold move." His casual tone carried an edge that made Jenny's skin prickle. "What if I told you I have every right to be here? More right than you might think." The code blue alarm had stopped, but Jenny could hear the controlled chaos of the medical team working. She needed to wrap this up. Looking at the man's stubborn expression, she knew they'd reached an impasse. Whatever game he was playing, she didn't have time for it. Not with patients needing care and a department to run. Taking a deep breath, Jenny made the decision that would soon become the talk of every hospital in the region. She reached for her phone, ready to call security, having no idea that she was about to kick one of the world's richest men out of his own hospital. 2 security guards arrived within minutes of Jenny's call. Officer Wilson, a gentle giant who'd worked at Metropolitan General for over a decade, took the lead. The other guard, Officer Chen, positioned himself carefully nearby. They'd handled countless difficult situations together, but something about this one felt different. "This gentleman needs to be escorted out," Jenny explained calmly, maintaining her professional demeanor. "He's refusing to comply with hospital policies." She could feel her heart pounding, but kept her voice steady. Years of handling emergency situations had taught her how to appear calm even when she wasn't. The mysterious man hadn't moved, still holding his tablet and wearing that knowing smile that was starting to get under Jenny's skin. He looked at the security guards with mild interest, as if this whole situation was some sort of social experiment. "Sir," Officer Wilson said in his characteristically gentle but firm voice, "we need you to come with us." He gestured toward the exit, keeping a respectful distance. Even in tense situations, Metropolitan's security team was trained to maintain professionalism. The man glanced at his watch, an expensive-looking piece that probably cost more than Jenny's monthly salary. "You know," he said, addressing the small crowd that had gathered, "this is actually quite refreshing. Most people would be scrambling to look me up by now." Jenny felt another twinge of recognition. Something about his face, his mannerisms, but she pushed the thought aside. She had a department to run, and this distraction had gone on long enough. Through the glass doors of the ER, she could see more patients arriving. They needed her attention more than this stubborn visitor. "Please, just follow the officers," Jenny said, trying one last time to resolve this peacefully. "I respect your right to wear what you want, but not in here, not in my ER." He raised an eyebrow at the words "my ER," and for a split second, Jenny thought she saw real respect in his eyes. Then he shrugged, tucked his tablet under his arm, and nodded to the security guards. "Lead the way, gentlemen." As they walked toward the exit, the man turned back one last time. "You might want to check your emails later," he said cryptically. This has been educational. The way he emphasized that last word sent a chill down Jenny's spine. The automatic doors slid open, and just like that, he was gone. The small crowd of onlookers slowly dispersed, returning to their duties. Nurse Thompson appeared at Jenny's side with a fresh cup of coffee. He always seemed to know when she needed one. "Well, that was interesting," he said, handing her the cup. "You okay?" Jenny took a grateful sip, trying to shake off the strange feeling that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her career. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just another day in the ER, right?" But even as she said it, she knew this was different. She walked back to her office, her mind already turning to the stack of paperwork waiting on her desk. The incident report for this would need to be detailed. Hospital policy required documentation of all security interventions. As she sat down at her computer, she noticed several new email notifications blinking urgently. The first one made her coffee cup freeze halfway to her mouth. The sender's name was familiar, very familiar. It was from the hospital board chairman, marked URGNT. Below it was another email, this one from an address she didn't recognize, but the name in the sender field made her stomach drop. The man she'd just kicked out, the one in the MAGA hat who'd been so calmly taking notes, was none other than Elon Musk himself. And according to the chairman's email, he owned not just this hospital, but the entire healthcare network it belonged to. Jenny set her coffee down carefully, her hands suddenly unsteady. She'd just ejected her boss's boss from his own emergency room. As she stared at the screen, trying to process what this meant for her career, her office phone started ringing. Jenny stared at her ringing phone like it was a ticking bomb. The chairman's number flashed on the display, and each ring made her heart beat faster. Finally, taking a deep breath, she picked it up. "Miss Park," the chairman's voice was unusually tense. "Are you aware of what just happened in your emergency department?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Sir, I can explain," Jenny started, but her voice caught slightly. She cleared her throat and started again. "We had a visitor refusing to comply with our political attire policy, and That visitor," the chairman cut in, "was Elon Musk. He now owns 51% of our hospital network through a recent acquisition." The words hit Jenny like a physical blow. She gripped her desk's edge, grateful she was sitting down. I didn't recognize him," she managed to say, though even as the words left her mouth, she realized why he'd seemed familiar. She'd seen his face countless times on news websites and social media, but in person, without the context of a news story or magazine cover, she hadn't made the connection. The chairman sighed heavily. "He was conducting an unannounced inspection of our facilities, testing our processes, our staff, our policies." There was a pause. "And you threw him out?" Jenny's mind raced. Her career, everything she'd worked for, felt like it was crumbling around her. She thought about her team, the improvements they'd made together, all the plans she had for the department. Would it all end because of one decision? "Sir, she started again, but he interrupted. "Check your email, Jenny. Mr. Musk sent something directly to you just now." The chairman's tone had changed, becoming almost curious. "Call me back after you read it." The line went dead, and Jenny quickly opened her email. There it was, a message from Elon Musk himself. Her hands were shaking slightly as she clicked it open. "Dear Ms. Park," the email began. "I want to commend you on your performance today. In the past month, I visited 12 of our hospitals. You're the only manager who stood firm on policy regardless of who was violating it." Jenny blinked, reading the line again. This wasn't the angry termination letter she'd expected. "While I personally disagree with the policy in question," the email continued, "your handling of the situation demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need. You prioritized patient comfort over authority, maintained professionalism under pressure, and showed that rules apply equally to everyone, even the owner." The knot in Jenny's stomach began to loosen, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. I've seen too many managers either ignore problems or create special exceptions for the wrong reasons. Your approach, while inconvenient for me personally, showed integrity. That's rare and valuable. The next part made Jenny sit up straighter. I'd like you to head a committee to review and update our hospital policies. Not to remove them, but to ensure they truly serve our patients' needs while respecting individual rights. We'll discuss details next week during the board meeting. The email ended with a postscript that actually made Jenny laugh out loud. I'll leave the hat at home next time. She sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Through her office window, she could see her team continuing their work, unaware of the drama unfolding. Nurse Thompson caught her eye and gave a questioning thumbs up. She smiled and nodded back. The day had started normally enough, but now Jenny realized something fundamental had shifted. She'd stood up for her principles, faced the consequences, and somehow come out stronger. As she reached for her phone to call the chairman back, she noticed her hands weren't shaking anymore. News travels fast in hospitals, and by the next morning, everyone had heard about what happened. Jenny arrived at work to find her team looking at her differently, a mixture of respect and curiosity in their eyes. Even Dr. Lee, who usually stayed focused on his patients, stopped to give her an approving nod. "So, you really didn't know it was him?" Nurse Thompson asked during their morning coffee break. He brought her favorite blueberry muffin from the cafeteria, his way of showing support. Jenny shook her head, breaking off a piece of the muffin. "Honestly, I was too focused on doing my job to worry about who he might be." She paused, then added with a small laugh, "Though maybe I should have guessed when I saw the Tesla parked outside." The story had spread beyond Metropolitan General. Jenny's phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues at other hospitals, and her LinkedIn profile had exploded with connection requests. Someone had even created a meme of the incident that was circulating among hospital staff nationwide. A stick figure in a white coat facing off against a stick figure in a red hat, with the caption, "When doing your job meets doing your job." But Jenny was more interested in the emails filling her inbox. Healthcare workers from across the country were sharing their own stories of standing up for hospital policies, dealing with difficult situations, and finding the balance between rules and compassion. One message particularly touched her. A nurse from a small rural hospital thanking her for showing that principles matter more than power. "Miss Park," her assistant poked his head in, "the press office is getting calls. They want to know if you'll do interviews." Jenny shook her head firmly. "No interviews. This isn't about me or Mr. Musk. It's about doing what's right for our patients." Her assistant smiled, clearly having expected that answer. Later that afternoon, Jenny led her regular department meeting. The room was more crowded than usual. Staff from other departments had found excuses to attend. She kept the focus on their daily challenges, patient care, resource allocation, and upcoming schedule changes. "Before we wrap up," she said, looking at her team, "I want to talk about yesterday. Yes, it happened. Yes, it was Elon Musk. And yes, I kicked him out." A ripple of laughter went through the room. "But here's what matters. Every single one of you would have done the same thing. Because that's who we are. We put our patients first, no matter what." The room burst into applause, making Jenny blush. She quickly moved on to discussing the upcoming policy review committee, inviting input from all staff levels. "This is our chance to make things better," she explained. "Not by throwing out rules, but by making sure they serve the right purpose." After the meeting, Jenny took a moment to stand by the emergency room windows, watching the flow of people coming and going. A young mother walked in holding her child's hand. An elderly man was helped out by his family, looking relieved. A paramedic team rushed in with a new patient, moving with practiced efficiency. This was why she loved her job. Not for the drama or recognition, but for these everyday moments of helping people when they needed it most. Her phone buzzed. Another message about yesterday's events, but she ignored it. Instead, she straightened her white coat and headed back to work. There were patients to care for, staff to support, and a department to run. As she walked through her ER, Jenny realized something important. Standing up for what you believe in isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified of the consequences. And sometimes, just sometimes, it works out better than you could have ever imagined. 2 weeks seemed to fly by, and now Jenny found herself walking into the main conference room for her first board meeting. The polished wooden table and leather chairs felt a world away from her busy ER. But she reminded herself that she earned her place here. She was early, a habit she couldn't break, so she took a moment to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Somewhere down there, ambulances were rushing to emergencies, families were waiting anxiously in hospital rooms, and healthcare workers were doing their best to help everyone they could. Quite a view, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind her. Jenny turned to find Elon Musk standing there, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. No red hat this time. Though I bet you prefer the view from your ER. Jenny smiled, feeling more comfortable than she would have expected. The ER windows mainly show the parking lot, but yes, I do prefer it there. She paused, then added, though I appreciate this opportunity to help make things better for all our hospitals. Other board members started filing in. Executives in suits, medical directors, financial officers. Jenny took her seat, spreading out her notes. She'd spent the past 2 weeks gathering input from staff at all levels, from janitors to surgeons. Their insights filled pages of careful notes. Before we begin, Musk said once everyone was seated, I want to share something. 2 weeks ago, I visited several of our hospitals undercover. I wanted to see how they really operated, not just how they looked on paper. He glanced at Jenny. Most managers either ignored problems or made exceptions when they recognized me. But one person stood firm. Jenny felt all eyes turned to her, but she kept her focus on her notes. This wasn't about her getting attention. That experience showed me something important, he continued. Rules without purpose are just obstacles. But principles applied equally and fairly, that's how we build trust. That's how we make healthcare better. The meeting that followed was unlike any board meeting before. Jenny presented her findings, not just about dress codes, but about all the little rules and policies that affected patient care. She shared stories from nurses who struggled with outdated procedures, from doctors who needed more flexibility in emergency situations, from patients who felt ignored by the system. The goal isn't to eliminate rules, she explained, her voice steady and confident. It's to make sure every policy serves our real purpose, helping people heal. To her surprise, the board members listened intently. They asked questions, shared their own experiences, and actually seemed to care about making things better. Even the financial officers, usually focused only on numbers, engaged in discussions about patient comfort and staff morale. As the meeting wrapped up, several new initiatives were approved. The dress code policy would be revised to focus on professionalism rather than specific restrictions. A new system would allow staff to suggest policy improvements directly to management. Training programs would emphasize understanding the reasons behind rules, not just following them blindly. One more thing, Musk said as people were gathering their things. Ms. Park, we'd like you to oversee these changes across all our hospitals. Your ER will get a new manager. Don't worry, you'll choose them, while you take on this larger role. Jenny felt a mix of emotions. Pride in the recognition, excitement about the opportunity to make bigger changes, but also a twinge of sadness about leaving her ER. As if reading her thoughts, Musk added, and yes, you can still work ER shifts. Some of us need to stay connected to what really matters. Walking back to her department later, Jenny reflected on how much had changed because of one simple decision to do what she thought was right. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nurse Thompson about a crazy situation in the ER. She smiled, picked up her pace, and headed toward the familiar chaos. Some things would never change, and that was exactly how she liked it.